being what you thought was going on and what's actually going on. But ultimately, you have to remember too that the reason so much effort and money is poured into deceiving us, it's because we have the power to change it. And a lot of it just comes down to completely like non-violent things people can do, like divesting from certain companies. Specifically, lately I've been talking a lot about divesting from big tech as much as possible, just because of like where a lot of those big tech billionaires and the national security state they're completely fused with at this point are taking us. They're a lot of what they are trying to do is entirely predicated on us remaining dependent specifically on their technology, when there's a lot of open source alternatives and like other like tech companies or developers that could be supported to develop alternative infrastructure. Like, we don't need their tools, and those tools can be made differently, as an example, right? So I know people sort of like can feel black pilled, I guess, when being confronted with this information. But ultimately, I think part of the reason things have gotten to the point they are now is that for so long, so many people didn't want to have to confront that disconnect between the reality we're told and what reality like actually is, like what's actually happening. Just because, people have been so security stuff, because they really are fused. I mean, they're the private contractors for the intelligence agencies, and there's a lot of overlap at this point between them. But there's a lot of efforts to like predictively or use AI predictively to see like who's going to do what, or will this person commit a crime? Will this person do that before, like this whole pre-crime paradigm and all of this other stuff. And we're seeing this trouble push to sort of define alleged misinformation online, like treating that as like cyber terrorism or a cyber crime. That online speech is, becoming criminalized. It's not just like censoring, it's like moving into that other sphere. So there's a lot of problems there. And so like a lot of the people that own this technology that's having these other like psychosocial impacts, negative impacts on humanity, are also controlled by a very centralized group that has like very specific agendas. In my opinion, they're essentially in control of the US government, and they're like very, I see them as pretty much overtly fascist at this point. A lot of the Silicon Valley billionaires very interested in having like very tight control over the US political system. I mean, they do in terms of like political financing and stuff of both parties. So, like, as far as social media goes, there's like no actual discussion about like the psychosocial impacts, really. Some of what you'll get is like fear mongering about like, oh, TikTok in China. But you have to keep in mind too that like a lot of TikTok executives at this point are like American, and they have like a lot of weird overlaps with like hiring NATO veterans and like one of the big guys at like Disney. It's not just like a CCP company. Like, there's a lot of overlap. And even if you get on like, just looking at transnational capital, like there is a lot of like back and forth between the US and China in terms of like the elite moneyed classes of both countries. Just as an example, you have a lot of involvement of Steve Schwartzman of Blackstone Capital in China, like a lot of involvement. You have people like Elon Musk who have a lot of business connections to China. And he literally wants to turn Twitter, which he bought, into American WeChat. And, the parent company of like WeChat but like has a huge stake in Tesla and is like one of their most active shareholders. So, it's not, a lot of times you'll get like sort of this fear mongering stance about it. And it's like, of course, like China probably does stuff. The existing system is broken. So the answer at the end of the day about how to fix really all of this stuff is like, are we going to go into the new system that's being built for us, or will we make our own system? And they're obviously going to be fundamentally different.
One thing that I think is confusing is it literally says in the title open AI. And one thing that we have in the Bitcoin space we talk about is that a lot of the other tokens are decentralized in name only, dinos or dinos. And so it sounds like a lot of AI is open in name only. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, OpenAI is like not an open source company. Like, they don't make it clear like their algorithms and all that stuff are like not transparent. So yeah, I mean, it's open in name only, for sure in that case. And I think a lot of people too just like see OpenAI as like its own thing, but really it's essentially like Microsoft at this point. So it's like part of the big tech thing. Um, and Microsoft is involved with a lot of weird stuff going on with AI, specifically with like Windows. Like they're essentially saying like your data is not your data, it's our data. We take your data off of your Windows computer and feed it to our AI. Like that's a requirement you have to agree to use Windows now. And like if they decide to lock you out of your Microsoft account for some reason, you lose all of your data. So your data is not your data on Microsoft now. And that is like an awful business model to support, I think. And I hopefully other people feel that way too. Like, I don't want to see that we should trust in the AI's delusions essentially and have that supersede our own perception of reality, because AI is so much smarter than I mean that's madness. That's like a collective delusion. But the problem is when you have it like doing facial recognition for law enforcement, or what we're seeing with Gaza right now, AI being choosing who lives and who dies. Or that's also being fielded in Ukraine too, like AI in warfare, before this more recent conflict in the Middle East broke out. That has major impacts, and they seem to not care about the accuracy. It's not more accurate. You can just have machine go on autopilot, and you're not going to have humans in the equation saying that's immoral. I'm not going to kill. I'm not going to bomb that house with kids in it. The machine's not going to do that. You know what I mean?
Right, and then
So
it's like, who do you hold accountable? Who's responsible? I think we just saw in the last week, there was like a rogue robot that hurt an employee at Tesla or one
yeah.
of Elon Musk's factories, right?
Yeah, well, the accountability thing is another big thing, because it's basically like the analogy I use for this is like the Wizard of Oz, like AI is the ultimate Wizard of Oz for the ruling class. Like they can just literally do whatever they want and say, oh, well, we're just doing what the AI algo said. And it's so smart. Being this rural community bank, one of the smallest banks in the country, to trying to become part of the Federal Reserve System, changing their name to Moonstone, trying to become the bank of the future, and being involved specifically in like the cryptocurrency space, and also like in marijuana, legal marijuana, and like just a huge transformation was underway there. And Noah Perlman, who I mentioned earlier, was like on the board of Moonstone. Also, Jalopin, obviously very involved, as was his son, Javier Jalopin, who was chief digital officer of Moonstone. And pretty much around the same time, like very small, like a couple days difference, I think. Alameda Research poured like 11.5 million into this bank, which was like at the time twice what they were the whole bank was worth. And then they swell in like less than a year from 10 millions in deposits to like 84 million, and like 74 million of that was just from 4 accounts, and 50 million of that was one account tied to Sam Bankman-Fried that was titled FTX Digital Markets. So you have Sean Jalopin, Deltec, you have SBF and FTX, and Deltec and FTX are obviously connected. And they're basically trying to use this tiny bank for something. And based on just what is documentable, there's